External cold and internal crazy Empress X dramatic spirit splitting gods, 1v1, live streaming quick where, Lu Jinghuan, as the Empress of the Great Yan, was revered by the people during her lifetime. However, after her death, she was bound to a live streaming fastware system, allowing her to conquer the scattered fragments of ancient gods in the small world. Lu Jinghuan sneered and said, "How can I, the Empress Dowager of the Tang dynasty, serve people with lust?" 001 coaxed, "No, as long as you can make them bend for you." Lu Jinghuan was lost in thought. "Oh, fold over. This is easy to handle." Dressed as the Empress Dowager Chongxi, is the male lead the arch-rival Regent. "It's okay, just give it a beating." Dressed in a vase like little scumbag, is the male lead a self-indulgent movie emperor. "It's okay, just give it a beating." Dressed in a wild and unrestrained demon, is the male lead a righteous and upright immortal. "It's okay, just give it a beating." Live room crowd. Is your strategy a bit off-center? 001 Storm cried, "Host, I want you to use love to influence and conquer him, not to beat him." Lu Jianhuan shrugged innocently and said, "Are you convincing me? Is it okay to fold your waist?" A certain deity chuckled lightly and said, take it to heart, take it orally." 001. Keywords of the novel. Fast-wearing. Live guide to becoming popular throughout the entire interstellar world without pop-ups, fast-wearing. Live guide to becoming popular throughout the entire interstellar world after becoming ill. Download the complete set of TXT, fast-wearing. Live guide to becoming popular after becoming ill. Read the latest chapters on the entire interstellar world. Chapter 1 World 1. The Regent's Plan for Misconduct 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 World 1. The Regent's Plan for Misconduct 1. Daxia Kingdom, Imperial Palace. Why don't I have any strength at all? Lu Jinghuan opened her eyes and saw the antique bed curtains. She was stunned for a moment and thought in a daze that she had returned to Dian. She is the Empress of the Great Yan. After being assassinated, she was forced to bind to the system and complete the strategy mission to earn points in order to gain freedom. What is the situation now? Has it started? Yes, host, your current identity is the Empress Dowager of the Great Xia Kingdom. The little emperor, along with the regent and his ministers, is already on the road to capturing traitors. You have not had the strength to smell too much smoke, and the current situation is very unfavorable to you. 001 spoke in a hurried tone. Catching adultery. Lu Jianhuan's eyes became sharp as she was about to turn over and sit up when the bed tent was suddenly lifted from outside. A man with a naked upper body crawled in and was stunned when he saw her awake. Empress Dowager. Empress Dowager. He was a little nervous about the cold gaze in his eyes as he went upstairs. Subconsciously, he swallowed his saliva, but as he listened to the footsteps getting closer and closer outside, he gritted his teeth and rushed over to press down on Lu Jianhuan, whispering fiercely, "The Empress Dowager, don't blame me for being lowly. There's nothing I can do about being lowly." Before Lu Jinghuan could even speak, she was covered by the man's rough big hand. She squinted her eyes slightly and her heart was filled with murderous intent. At the same time, conversations could be heard outside the door. "Are you sure someone really went in?" A young but majestic voice sounded. "Your Majesty, I saw with my own eyes a guard enter the side hall where the Empress Dowager was resting." As soon as the eunuch finished speaking, the little emperor's expression turned cold and he said, "Someone, open the door." At this moment, the barrage in the interstellar live broadcast room rolled wildly. It's over, it's over. I'm so nervous. Did I get caught cheating at the beginning? Host is in danger. Congratulations to this host for welcoming Waterloo on the first day of broadcasting. Next, it's probably either White Ling poison wine or White Ling poison wine. What about the male lead? He should be able to help, right? Help, I dare not look down. Is the first world so difficult? With a loud bang, the tightly closed palace door was kicked open from outside, revealing the gloomy face of the little emperor. Standing beside him was a tall man in a python robe, smelling the smell of the hall. The man's starry eyes narrowed slightly and slowly rubbed the trigger on his thumb. The bed curtains in the side hall hang low, covering the beautiful scenery but unable to conceal the two overlapping figures. The little emperor and a group of ministers who saw this scene immediately turned pale. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and drag down that daredevil thing inside, the prime minister said angrily. Yes. Take a quick step forward with a sword guard, ready to take action. Jinghuan on the bed looked at the approaching figure and forcefully bit through her tongue, causing a sharp pain that quickly restored her strength. She exerted herself to lift her leg and, taking advantage of the distraction on her body, lifted her knee and pressed it against his crotch. The naked man immediately blushed and screamed, "Ah! Get lost!" She lifted her hand and pushed him away, kicking him out of bed. Jinghuan gathered up his collar and looked at the surging crowd of people through the bed curtain, pulling his lips. These people knew how important chastity was to women of this era, but unfortunately came up with such a poisonous plan to harm her. Who hates her so much that she can't even live and die? Her gaze wandered through the crowd and finally fell on the two tall and short figures at the forefront. In a eerie silence, a tall figure suddenly took a step forward. "Empress Dowager, won't you come out and explain?" The man's voice was mellow and gentle, but upon closer inspection, it was not difficult to hear the teasing meaning behind it, indicating that he was also watching a good show. A sentence instantly attracted everyone's attention to her, and the guard on the ground, who twisted like a maggot while covering her lower body, was ignored. Jinghuan chuckled lightly and walked out with one hand, opening the golden tent. White and bare feet landed on the crimson carpet, and a strong color contrast suddenly appeared in front of everyone. The ministers were surprised and turned their heads to cover their faces with sleeves. What kind of behavior is it? Empress Dowager, what about your propriety, righteousness, integrity, and shame? The prime minister turned his back and cursed at the same time. The little emperor also blushed and said, "Mother, let's put on her shoes and socks first." Only the previous man stood there motionless and even looked around with interest. Jinghuan was dressed in a middle coat, buttoned tightly and without any problems. She only had her feet exposed and didn't look like she had done anything. "Host, this is your target audience, the regent of the Great Xia Kingdom, Yan Ruqing. He has an unpredictable personality, always seeking revenge, is not close to male or female, and is very lonely. Currently, his favorability is 0, so come on." Jinghuan stared at Yan Ruqing without hesitation, and after a moment, calmly asked, "Have you seen enough?" Yan Ruqing suddenly smiled, and her sword eyebrows and starry eyes suddenly carried a hint of ruffian energy. "Not bad. I don't know if this, okay, answer her question or if it's about her feet." Before Jinghuan could speak, Yan Ruqing suddenly approached and stood half a step in front of her. With one hand, she untied the thin layer of silver python-patterned cloak on her body, shook and lifted her arm, and draped it over Jinghuan's shoulder. Jinghuan turned her face and saw that Yan Ruqing had already retreated. She said expressionlessly, "You can turn back now." He had an extremely tall figure, and his cloak was a bit short on him. When he reached the floor, he dragged his body onto the ground and covered her feet. Jinghuan's eyes flickered slightly, this regent king is a bit interesting. She gathered up her collar and slowly tied up the cloak strap. The ministers turned around to breathe a sigh of relief and began to criticize her with all their words. The prime minister pointed to her heart-wrenching and said, "Empress Dowager, before the bones of the late emperor are cold, you can't wait to seek pleasure in the palace. Are you worthy of the late emperor, your majesty, and the ancestors of the royal family?" Jinghuan tilted her head slightly, raised her eyebrows on one side, and said, "I've been dead for a year, haven't I been cold yet? Off-topic remarks, New Food Guide 1. Warning. The first life is not a perfect ending, not a B, but there may be regrets because it is related to the setting, so the emotional line gradually progresses. Please refer to the article for details. 2.1v1, Shuangjie. Later on, it will be explained that he may frequently change the cover to see where the plot goes. 3. Update. 2 o'clock in the morning every day, adjust the mood according to fate, occasionally explode, never interrupt. If you take a leave, you will inform us in advance. 4. Comment. The character does not represent the author's 3 perspectives, everything serves the plot, and the author's personal attacks are permanently banned from blacklisting, refusing to trample, refusing to write guidance, and refusing to be pointed at from a god's perspective. Normal discussion, everything is casual, attacks, insults, and unfounded low-star negative reviews, blacklisting and banning the entire process. 5. Thank you for catching insects. I will make changes when I have time, but I won't reply one by one. When I get busy, I may forget to apologize in advance. 6. The entire story is full of nonsense, false fabrication, and personal devices without logic. The author is the biggest bug. If there is something that makes you feel uncomfortable, immediately quit, protect your happy mood, and do not force yourself. Don't force me either, kneel down and thank you. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. The Regent's Plan for Misconduct 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. The Regent's Plan for Misconduct 2. Her tone was sincere, as if she was truly puzzled. The Prime Minister choked and widened his eyes. Do you dare to disrespect the late Emperor? Lu Jinghuan nodded sincerely and said, I dare. Prime Minister. I want to curse but stop. A barrage of bullets suddenly rolled over. Ha ha ha, don't be too happy too early. She hasn't cleared the suspicion yet. What's the use of her sharp mouth? If you can't provide evidence, you'll have to die. As soon as this barrage appeared, the people in the live broadcast room fell silent for an instant. As expected, the spearhead quickly turned to Lu Chuanhuan again. I don't know, shame, the palace is filthy. Duke Fugua has really raised a good daughter. I'm afraid it's not the first time we've had a secret meeting, is it? Poor thing, the late Emperor entrusted His Majesty to you. If I had known this, I should have let you bury the late Emperor in the first place. That's right, even when she's on the brink of death, she's cunning. No matter what you say, the Infidelity Guard is a dead end. From my perspective, there's no need to talk nonsense to her. Just ask Your Majesty to give her a glass of poisoned wine, leave her whole body, and throw it outside for burial. It's a matter of the royal family's face and should not be leaked. Yes, if you do such a heinous act, you must be executed and the palace walls must be cleared as a warning to others. Lu Jinghuan's eyes gradually cooled down, like an icy lake, seemingly calm but actually surging with undercurrents. Everyone shut up. A burly middle-aged man stood up and walked up to Lu Chuanhuan, glaring at her. Lu Jinghuan. What is he staring at me for? Do you still have a face full of hatred and frustration? Host, he is your father. Lu Jinghuan said. Oh, so this is Duke Fugua. Fu Guogong's small mountain-like body poked towards Lu Jinghuan's side, adding to Lu Jinghuan's pitiful and petite appearance. Yan Ruqing's long eyelashes trembled slightly. This matter has not been thoroughly investigated yet, so everyone is busy convicting the Empress Dowager, which may be too anxious. Your Majesty and the Regent are still here, so which round of advice will you give? The Duke of Fugua was full of energy and sounded like a bell, and as he spoke, he looked at the little Emperor who had been silent all along and Yan Ruqing, who had remained indifferent. Your Majesty, please be aware that the Empress Dowager has always been dignified and virtuous, and she would never do such a filthy thing. The tall figure of Duke Fugua knelt down towards the little Emperor. Lu Chuanhuan's heart tightened slightly, and a certain indescribable taste floated up. The little Emperor looked around in confusion, feeling inexplicably uneasy. After hesitating for a moment, he stepped forward to help the Duke of Fugua, but asked Lu Chuanhuan, "What did Empress Mother say?" "I said I was framed, do you believe me?" Lu Jinghuan turned around and walked to the guard's side. Her foot was merciless, and the guard was kicked and half of his life was gone, lying on the ground groaning. When he saw the Empress Dowager coming over, he got up and widened his eyes, looking at her with resentment. "Empress Dowager, it's clear that you called me over and stripped me of all the seduction. Now that you've been discovered, you want to kick me out." The little emperor pursed his lips and looked up at Yan Ruqing. "What does Uncle Huang think?" "Now that the Queen Mother and the guards each have their own opinions, I don't understand these things. It's better for Uncle Huang to make a decision." Yan Ruqing quickly raised her eyebrows and said, "Oh." He lowered his gaze and gave the little emperor a deep glance. "Your Majesty really wants me to make a decision?" The little emperor nodded, his eyes full of trust and dependence. "I believe that the emperor will handle it fairly and give an explanation to the mother and adults," he said in an instant. Everyone looked at Yan Ruqing, including Lu Jinghuan. With her eyes facing each other, Yan Ruqing lifted her chin slightly towards Lu Chuanhuan and said, "Empress Dowager, you heard your Majesty's words. Now think about how you can prove your innocence. If you can't prove it, I will have to send Empress Dowager on the road." The Prime Minister snorted disdainfully. How can she prove her innocence on her own? Can she undergo a physical examination? Even if she doesn't achieve that step, she has a skin-to-skin relationship with her man, but we have seen it with our own eyes. What else is there to argue about? Lu Jianhuan glanced at him. It seemed that this Prime Minister really wanted to let himself die. Why? She jotted it down in her heart and planned to investigate it later. She crouched down next to the guard, smiled softly, and the guard's heart furrowed as she watched. "What do you want to do?" Lu Jinhuan's eyes suddenly changed, fierce and wild. She grabbed the guard's chin and forced him to lift his face. "You said I found you, and you took off all the seduction. So, did you see the birthmark on my waist too? On the left or right?" As soon as these words were spoken, the courtiers exclaimed in an uproar, "Indeed, you are shameless. You are shameless." Lu Jinghuan pretended not to hear and stared closely at the guard's face. The guard was taken aback and nervously turned his eyes, instinctively looking in a direction. Lu Chuanhuan caught a glimpse of two people standing there. The little emperor and Yan Ruqing. Lu Jianhuan suddenly realized that the mastermind was one of these two people. She lowered her eyes and exerted some force on her hands, saying, "Tell me, what's wrong? I didn't see it. My humble position. I was too nervous at the time and didn't look carefully, so I couldn't remember clearly." The guards vaguely planned to deceive them. Yan Ruqing nodded and said, "What you said makes sense." His gaze fell on Lu Chuanhuan, as if he was lost in thought. Lu Jinhuan smiled, and the guard suddenly felt uneasy. The next moment, she asked again, "Do you remember if my birthmark is red or black? It's so big." The guard's cold sweat is about to come down this time. He didn't even see it. Who knows it's red and black? He looked anxiously towards the corner, but neither of the two over there reacted. Lu Jinghuan narrowed her eyes slightly and said, "You didn't actually see it, did you? You even said I took off my clothes to seduce you, you lied. I don't have it." At the critical moment of life and death, the guard couldn't care so much anymore. He gritted his teeth and gambled, "Red, it should be red, but who cared about what the birthmark looked like at that time? And we usually turn off the lights, so you don't let me look blind." When these old ministers said this, their faces turned black and red. It was really wonderful. Without waiting for them to scold, Lu Chuanhuan suddenly burst into laughter, which was clear and pleasant, as if she had heard some big joke. The Prime Minister frowned tightly and said, "What are you laughing at? Are you crazy?" Lu Jinhuan turned his head and gave him a meaningful look. then released the hand that was pinching the guard's face. The guard breathed a sigh of relief, thinking he had succeeded. Just as a smug smile appeared on his lips, it was shattered by a slap. He looked at Lu Qianhuan in shock. Lu Jianhuan had already stood up, and the silver python black cloak slowly unfolded, highlighting her slender and straight figure. She smiled and said coldly from a high position, "Nonsense, I don't even have a birthmark on my waist." The courtiers were all shocked and said, "What?" Duke Fugua's eyes flickered slightly, and he met the gaze of Lu Qianhuan, who said in a deep voice, "Duke Fugua can testify for me." Duke Fugua nodded and was about to speak when he was interrupted by the Prime Minister. "Fugua Gong is your father. If you encounter such a beheading incident, he will be willing to target you." The Prime Minister sneered, "How can his words be counted? Do you think we are fools?" Others also joined in. 001 is puzzled, "Host, why are you saying that? If they ask someone to test your body, wouldn't it reveal the truth?" Lu Jinghuan calmly said, "Because I have to pull someone into the water." 001 confused. "Who is it?" Lu Jinghuan's gaze seemed to unintentionally pause for a moment on Yan Ruqing. Yan Ruqing raised her sword eyebrows, End of this chapter. Chapter 3. The Regent's Conspiracy 3. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. The Regent's Conspiracy 3. If you don't believe me, you can ask my palace maid to come and have me undergo an autopsy. Lu Jinghuan withdrew her gaze and looked at the little emperor. The little emperor looked at her with concern, then. "Your palace maids are all your people, what's the use of them? If you want to verify them, of course, you need to find someone who has nothing to do with you and will never betray you." Before the little emperor finished speaking, the minister fried the pot first. The Prime Minister nodded at the words and said, "What you said is very accurate." Lu Jinghuan showed a somewhat troubled expression. The people in the live broadcast room can't sit still. Is there a birthmark or not? I'm a bit confused, why does she keep letting her own people come? She doesn't really have a birthmark, does she? Isn't this a slap in the face? The Empress shouldn't be so foolish, right? I have an indescribable feeling, lying down. Look, she smiled. Lu Jianhuan lowered her head and bent her lower lip without any trace. The speed was extremely fast, and the curvature was extremely small, which could not be detected without careful examination. Yan Ruqing, who watched coldly, rubbed her finger again. Lu Jinghuan slowly lifted her head, her face slightly red, as if feeling a bit embarrassed. Your people. Who do you think is reliable? Her sharp gaze swept over everyone's faces, mostly not looking at her, and some gloating. Finally, her gaze stopped at the little emperor, who took a step forward and said, I. Unexpectedly, Lu Qianhuan suddenly raised her hand and pointed towards him, as if she had gone all out. Since that's the case, let the regent come. Anyway, my reputation has been ruined and I don't care about being seen. The regent has never dealt with me. You should believe his words, right? The little emperor was stunned and turned his head to look at Yan Ruqing in confusion. Yan Ruqing's expression was taken aback, with an unexpected look on her face. This king. Lu Jinghuan looked at his expression and smiled inwardly, really able to pretend. The Prime Minister and others looked at each other, how dare she point at Yan Ruqing. However, Yan Ruqing and the Empress Dowager have always been like water and fire, both eyeing that position. If given the opportunity, Yan Ruqing will definitely step on the Empress Dowager. If it were him, he would not have helped the Empress Dowager cheat. The Prime Minister's face was gloomy, and after careful consideration, he agreed. The development of the situation is beyond his control. Most people agree and he can only accept it, otherwise it will inevitably lead to suspicion. Yan Ruqing stood up and said, how can we verify it? Lu Jianhuan pointed to the opposite screen and said, go to the back for inspection. As she spoke, she walked behind the screen first. Yan Ruqing glanced at the dazed little emperor beside her, tugged her lips, and followed closely behind. The light behind the screen was dim, and Lu Jinghuan was okay to be alone. With the addition of Yan Ruqing, who was tall and had long legs, the place suddenly became crowded and narrow. The two stood face to face, with almost no gap between them. The scent from each other's bodies lingered in their breaths, and behind a screen, a group of people stood. This kind of secrecy in public gives people an indescribable stimulation. "Please, Empress Dowager," Yan Ruqing lowered her eyes and looked at Lu Qianhuan. Lu Jinghuan's eyes were clear and cold, as if she could see through an icy lake at a glance. She stared at Yan Ruqing like this, her hands moving non-stop. She slowly untied the tie of her cloak, then draped it over Yan Ruqing's shoulder. In the gap between her head and neck, she whispered in his ear, "Did you set the game?" Yan Ruqing felt the heat lingering in her ears, her Adam's apple sliding slightly, and she asked in a deep voice, "Is this how I behave in the heart of the Empress Dowager?" Lu Jinghuan's eyes flickered slightly as he stepped back a bit and looked up at him. "Then you must be careful. Sandpipers and clams compete for profit. Today is me, and tomorrow is you." Yan Ruqing's eyes were deep, and she said, "So." His gaze shifted downwards and fell on Lu Qianhuan's fingers. With her movements, the middle clothes gradually opened, revealing the light blue clothes inside. She lifted her hem and a soft waist caught his eye. The round and compact navel is very clean, with a light red birthmark on it, resembling a butterfly flapping its wings, very beautiful and vibrant. Lu Jinghuan put down her small clothes, grabbed Yan Ruqing's cloak strap, and looked up proudly, saying, "Help me once, I'll pay it back 100 times the next day." Her eyes were bright, with a hint of wild and reckless cruelty. Yan Ruqing watched steadily and suddenly reached out to button up her middle coat. His hands were big and hot, and there were calluses left on his fingertips from holding swords all year round. Occasionally touching Lu Qianhuan's skin would bring a rough shiver. Buckled to the top one, Lu Jinghuan had to slightly raise her neck, like a lamb pulling her neck to slaughter. Yan Ruqing suddenly laughed, her laughter deep and unclear in meaning. "You're so ruthless that you dare to risk your own life." He bent his finger and gently scraped on her fair and slender neck, and the skin instantly covered in a layer of crimson. Lu Jinghuan shook uncontrollably for a moment, but still stubbornly looked at him, laughing but not speaking. Yan Ruqing's smile deepened in her eyes. He pulled off his cloak and draped it over her, saying in a deep voice, "Remember what you said today." Lu Jinghuan raised her eyebrows and said, "You must act as you say." Yan Ruqing rubbed her thumb, then her face darkened and she strode out. Lu Jinghuan lowered her eyes, feeling that there was something extra in her palm. She lowered her eyes and saw that it was a jade ring. Yan Ruqing's dignified and mellow voice rang in her ear. "I have seen that the Empress Dowager has no birthmark on her waist. This person is indeed lying. How dare the little guard slander the Empress Dowager of the dynasty? There must be someone behind her who will give orders." The Jin Wei guarding outside immediately rushed in, "I am despicable." Yan Ruqing's cold gaze fell on the guard, with a heavy smile on his face. "Put him in the imperial prison, and I will personally interrogate him," she said. The little emperor's expression froze for a moment. "That mother." Yan Ruqing looked back at him and said, "The Empress Dowager has been quite frightened today, and it was also due to the negligence of the palace guards. Your Majesty should comfort her well." "Little Emperor." The Prime Minister looked at Yan Ruqing in shock and said, "Prince, is this all over? The Empress Dowager. She's barefoot and hugging men in front of everyone. Can she just let it go?" Lu Jinghuan walked out from behind the screen, barefoot on the carpet without making a sound. She walked behind the Prime Minister, and her cool hand suddenly rested on his neck. The Prime Minister was so frightened that he almost jumped out. He suddenly turned around and found Lu Qianhuan, his face turning pale. "What are you doing?" Lu Jinghuan innocently wiped her hands on her cloak and said, "You hugged me too. Are you going to die? Prime Minister." Yan Ruqing suddenly smiled and said, "You all trespassed into the Empress Dowager's sleeping room and saw her feet. According to the laws of the Great Xia, you must dig out your eyeballs." The ministers were stunned and ran away after a moment. "Today is my recklessness. I will go back and reflect on the wall now." The Prime Minister watched as everyone was gone, and reluctantly brushed his sleeves. He hummed and quickly left. "Your Majesty, do you have anything else to say?" Lu Chuanhuan looked at the little emperor standing still in the corner. The little emperor hesitated to speak, but finally shook his head and said, "Mother, rest well, my son is leaving." Lu Jinghuan stood in place, watching everyone leave. Yan Ruqing was the last to leave. After crossing the threshold, he suddenly paused and turned his eyes to look over. Lu Jinghuan turned his head to look at him, but he didn't say anything. After a moment, he turned around and walked away quickly. 001 excitedly jumped out and said, "Host, Yan Ruqing's favorability has increased by 10. Congratulations." The sunlight outside the hall was scorching, and Lu Chuanhuan stood at the empty entrance of the side hall, closing his eyes and slowly exhaling a breath. "I won the bet." The audience in the live broadcast room, after watching this big show, all turned into screaming chickens and wanted to go back and watch it again. It's so exciting. The tension between these two is absolutely amazing. I feel like I'm going to turn right to the flower market the next moment. But I didn't quite understand the birthmark part. Can someone explain it to me? End of this chapter. Chapter 4. The Regent's Plan for Misconduct. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. The Regent's Plan for Misconduct. Lu Jinghuan is undoubtedly criticizing her crazily. What she said earlier was just a prelude, to lure Yan Ruqing to spend time with her alone, and then take the opportunity to throw an olive branch. Yan Ruqing helps her, and they are the people on the same boat. If they don't help, if they expose her secrets, she will definitely die. How dare she? What if Yan Ruqing doesn't help her? It's too dangerous for her to expose her birthmark when she comes up, right? So she's crazy. What Lu Jinghuan thinks is. Anyway, I'm dead, they'll kill you next, you see what to do. Rabbit death dog cooking. Yan Ruqing can't ignore this, so her chances of winning are very high. The Jedi counterattack and killing their opponents as allies is amazing. I'm getting more and more excited about the following plot. Lu Jinghuan turned around and returned to the side hall, finding her clothes scattered on the bed. She dressed neatly before leaving. As soon as the door opened, it met two pairs of watery big eyes. "Empress Dowager, you have been wronged. It's because maidservants are useless." The shorter one knelt down, crying uncontrollably. The other one wearing a silver-pink dress had an ugly face, with red eyes, but he held back and didn't cry. Under Lu Jian's heart, there was a dispute, and the system passed on her original memories. After a moment of silence, she reached out to the palace maid in silver clothes and said, "Chu Yun, help the AI family back to the palace." "Yes, Empress Dowager." Chu Yun supported her as she walked out. Passing by the kneeling person, Chu Yun hesitated for a moment but didn't ask. The people on the ground stopped crying. What's going on? Why does the Empress Dowager ignore her? As she was hesitating, Lu Jinghuan suddenly stopped by her side and lowered her eyes and asked coldly, "Chu Qing, are you kneeling here because you don't think the people of the AI family have lost enough?" The palace maids and eunuchs who came and went nearby couldn't help but look over here. Chu Qing's face turned white and she quickly stood up and said, "I'm just worried about the Empress Dowager." Lu Jinghuan smiled faintly and walked straight over. Chu Qing followed anxiously. Silent all the way, she arrived at the dormitory where Lu Chuanhuan was delighted. She held back the other palace attendants, leaving only Chu Yun and Chu Qing behind. The two looked at each other with some unease. Lu Jinghuan said to the humanitarian outside, "Close the door." The eunuch immediately closed the door from outside. The light inside the hall instantly dimmed. Lu Jinghuan sat in the main seat, leaning against the back of the chair, casually resting her hands on the armrests, looking lazy and exuding an indescribable dignity. "Kneel down." Her voice was not loud, but it made people involuntarily listen. Chu Yun and Chu Qing knelt obediently on the ground, slightly lowering their heads, revealing the jewelry on their heads. Chu Yun only inserted a silver hairpin and wore a few simple pearl flowers, which perfectly matched her identity, while Chu Qing inserted a gold inlaid jade hairpin surrounded by pearls, looking luxurious and exquisite. Lu Jinghuan's gaze shifted downwards, and the clothes worn by Chu Qing were also of top-quality material, peach pink, which looked quite fresh. The word "favored" permeates everywhere. When the AI family had an accident, where were you? Lu Jinghuan tapped the handrail with her fingers in a regular pattern. The sound of "dudu-dudu" makes the listener's heart tense. Chu Qing lowered her head and sobbed, saying, "The Empress Dowager said she was tired. I thought she had drunk too much, so I went to the kitchen to bring her sobbing soup." Lu Jianhuan raised his eyebrows and said, "Didn't the AI family order Chu Yun to go?" Chu Yun pursed her lips, and Chu Qing glanced at her. She looked up and said, "I saw that she hasn't come back for a long time. I'm afraid something might happen, so I went to see." Unexpectedly, the villain took advantage of this situation. "It's because I'm sorry for my mother." As she spoke, she burst into tears again, accompanied by her pretty little face, so pitiful. However, Lu Jianhuan just looked at her expressionlessly, and Chu Qing couldn't cry as she cried. "What's going on? Didn't the Empress Dowager feel soft and relaxed when she cried on her own in the past? Did you get a lot of stimulation today? You are the dowry maid of the AI family. You grew up with the AI family and have been around them for almost 10 years, right?" Chu Qing didn't know the meaning behind what she said, so she pondered and said, "Yes, it's been almost 10 years. Unexpectedly, Lu Jianhuan suddenly stood up and smiled. 10 years of friendship cannot resist the temptation of power." Chu Qing was greatly shocked. "Empress." Lu Jinghuan lowered her gaze and said in a relaxed and plain tone, "Tell me, who bought you and let you sprinkle smoke in the incense burner?" "Empress, I am unjustly accused." "What kind of smoke addiction, what kind of bribe?" "I don't know what Empress is talking about." Chu Yun was also confused. She looked at Chu Qing with suspicion and said, "Madam, is there any misunderstanding among them?" "Misunderstanding," said Lu, hiding a knife in his laughter. She lifted her hand and pulled off the golden hairpin from Chu Qing's head, her tone subtle. "These days, you've changed from your usual simplicity, choosing fresh and tender clothes to wear. You've taken out all the jewelry you used to cherish the most, applying makeup every day, and occasionally getting distracted. Are you pretending to be someone in your heart?" Chu Qing's face turned white in an instant, and her lips trembled. "I haven't." But her voice clearly weakened, indicating that she was feeling guilty. Chu Yun was taken aback and his eyes showed disappointment. "The AI family once rewarded you with a similar golden hairpin, but the one in the middle was a magnolia flower, and your one is a jade-carved peony or a high-quality sheep fat jade, which ordinary people cannot afford to give. Your beloved is quite generous. Is it your Majesty or the Regent?" Lu Jinghuan said abruptly as he shouted. Chu Yun was shocked and looked at Chu Qing. Chu Qing was so frightened that she fell to the ground and stared at Lu Jianhuan. She immediately reacted and knelt down, bowing and saying, "Empress is aware that I dare not betray her. The hairpin of the maid was given to me by her when I visited my mother from the palace before. If you don't see the coffin, don't shed tears. It's early morning, and the AI family has given you a chance." Lu Jianhuan let go of her hand, her hairpin fell to the ground, and the peony flower in the middle fell out, like their broken master-servant relationship. "Someone Drag Chuqing out until she is willing to speak, and everyone else is watching over the AI family from the sidelines, not even one less. The eunuch and guards outside the door rushed in and dragged Chuqing out. Chuqing cried and begged for mercy, but Chuyun couldn't bear to keep her face open. However, she met the indifferent gaze of Huan upstairs, and her heart suddenly jumped. She immediately knelt down to show her loyalty. I will never betray my mother. If I break this oath, I will not die easily. Jinghuan nodded and said, let's go. Yes, Chuyun went out and watched the execution with others. The board fell heavily on Chuqing, and the mournful cries echoed through the palace. Jinghuan sat back in her chair and sipped tea slowly. Undoubtedly the Empress, just one word of cruelty. You can tell Chuqing's problem through clues, and this observational ability is amazing. I have goosebumps now, and I like this crisp and sharp temperament. Kill the chicken and warn the monkey with one arrow and two birds, it's just the Emperor's method. I'm even more curious now who did this thing. The barrage quickly flashed, and many people became interested and started giving rewards. Jinghuan listened to the sound of her points being credited, her face slightly softened. These were all her ransom money, the more the better. After a quarter of an hour, Chuqing couldn't hold on anymore and said that it was the regent's people who bribed her. As long as everything was successful, she would be given the position of concubine. Chuanhuan sneered and was not surprised by the answer. He wrote a letter to the guard and said, ask someone to bandage her up, don't die, and take her out to the Fuguo Gong mansion. After reading the letter, he will know what to do. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. The Regent's Plan for Misconduct 5. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. The Regent's Plan for Misconduct 5. As soon as the guards escorted Chuqing away, Chuyun walked in with a pale face and said, Madam, your Majesty is here. Jinghuan put down the teacup and slightly raised his eyes, facing the door. The little emperor strode towards him, his face tense, and his bright yellow dragon robe became even more dazzling in the sunlight, even a bit glaring. The young emperor is only 8 years old. Ordinary children are still playing with mud at this age, but he is already scheming. Should we say it's fortunate or unfortunate? I have seen your Majesty. The palace people all knelt down to salute him, but Chuanhuan just sat there watching him. The little emperor pursed his lips tighter. As soon as he raised his hand, the palace people immediately understood and retreated, leaving only their mother and son in the hall. Why did your Majesty come? The birthday banquet has ended. Jinghuan's tone was calm, but the little emperor was even more flustered. He took a step forward and walked up to Jinghuan, looking up at her and staring closely into her eyes. Is the Empress mother holding a grudge against her son? Ha! Chuanhuan chuckled lightly, Your Majesty, where are you talking about? Why does the AI family want to keep a grudge against you? The little emperor looked disappointed and sad, because I didn't immediately protect my mother and let those ministers bully you like that. Jinghuan lowered her eyes and looked at her well-maintained nails. Your Majesty is young, so naturally the ministers will not take you seriously. The little emperor suddenly clenched his fist and said, What about the Empress mother? Jinghuan's gaze froze and he slowly looked up. His clear eyes seemed to be able to see his heart all the way, and the little emperor couldn't help but become nervous. The AI family has never underestimated you. Is the true dragon emperor a thing in the pool? Jinghuan's red lips slightly curled, and he raised his hand to lightly pat the little emperor's head. However, there is more than one dragon. Your Majesty, don't be fooled by your intelligence. When the little emperor left, his expression was extremely dazed. When he went down the stairs, he didn't pay attention and slipped, stumbling and almost rolling down. Scared, the eunuch Lu Bai's soul was almost gone by his side. He quickly grabbed him and said, Oh, Your Majesty, you must be very careful. The little emperor clenched his wrist with his back and murmured with a bitter smile, after all, Empress Mother has separated from me. Your Majesty, this is not the place to speak. Lu Bai's face changed dramatically. The little emperor was also fragile for a moment. Lu Bai reminded him to immediately restrain his expression, release his hand, and stride towards the direction of the imperial study behind him. Go, call the Prime Minister to see me. Yes. At night, a wooden carriage stopped at the corner gate of the Regent's mansion. The gatekeeper heard a loud knocking sound and opened the door to see that there was no one, only the carriage. He quickly opened the cover on the car, met a pair of frightened eyes, and the gatekeeper was shocked. He stepped forward to find someone. After a quarter of an hour, Yan Ruqing's confidants turned over and lifted the cover to take a look. They were immediately stunned and said, "Isn't this the person next to the Empress Dowager?" Chu Qing's eyes lit up and she struggled on the wooden cart, tears in her eyes, but her mouth was stuffed with cloth and wrapped in a rope, unable to speak at all. "Sir, what should this person do? Since they are from the side of the Empress Dowager, if they were suddenly sent to us, there shouldn't be any conspiracy, right?" the gatekeeper asked nervously. Mo Shangshuang shook his head, pondered for a moment, then looked left and right. Without seeing anyone, he said to the guard following behind, "Carry the person to the front hall." Yes. The guards immediately pushed the wooden cart in, and as the gatekeeper closed the door, no one knew what had happened. "Don't turn halfway to the study." Yan Ruqing stood with his hands down, standing behind the desk, staring at the map of the Xia on the wall in a daze. Candlelight stretched his tall body, casting a desolate shadow on the ground. This map has been around for some years, with yellow paper and many markings on it that ordinary people may not understand. However, Yan Ruqing understands that each marker represents a battle, which he personally fought. But he hasn't been on the battlefield for 2 years. Yan Ruqing's eyes were deep in color. Dong dong dong. His eyes lit up and he said, "Who?" "Prince, I am a subordinate." Yan Ruqing turned around and opened the door for him, looking indifferent. "What's up?" Mo Shangshuang said about the gatekeeper, "Now that Chu Qing has been taken to the front hall, what do you think should be done, Prince? Is it clear in the early morning?" Yan Ruqing raised her eyebrows in surprise and quickly realized with a clear smile, this is a great gift from the Empress Dowager. "Of course, I have to go and see it myself." Mo Shangshuang said, "Ah. What kind of gift is this?" Chu Qing thought she would be saved when she arrived at the Regent's mansion, but she didn't expect that although these people pushed her in, it was just that. She didn't loosen her ties at all, and even threw her onto a wooden cart without even looking at her. She waited anxiously, feeling both depressed and resentful in her heart. Quickly, the footsteps moved from far to near, and her eyes lit up again. She struggled to make a sound and said, "Help me." The newcomer paused in their footsteps, and then a low laugh sounded, "I really don't understand how to cherish fragrance and jade." Upon hearing this voice, Chu Qing's excited eyes turned red and she said, "Lord, Lord." Suddenly, a cool breeze struck, and the white cloth on her body was lifted, making her figure clearer and clearer, tall and upright, cold and handsome. Chu Qing's heart jumped uncontrollably. She looked at Yan Ruqing affectionately, but Yan Ruqing only glanced at her before turning around and saying, "Unbind her." After being released, Chu Qing lay on the wooden carriage and reached out her hand to Yan Ruqing, "Prince, help me. The Empress Dowager wants me to die." Yan Ruqing sat in the armchair, looking down at her. Her amber pupils were as deep as an abyss in the night. "Why do you think I will save you?" Chu Qing was stunned for a moment and said, "Prince. I betrayed the Empress Dowager only for the sake of the prince." Mo Shangshuang instantly widened his eyes and turned to look at Yan Ruqing. Yan Ruqing narrowed her eyes and suddenly pointed to Chu Qing, saying, "Take out the things under her body." "Yes." The guard came forward and tore a letter from under Chu Qing's arm, handing it to Yan Ruqing. Chu Qing looked at the letter in fear. Why didn't she notice it before? Whose letter? The Empress Dowager. Yan Ruqing took the letter and carefully checked it. There were no signs of opening the seal. He tore it open and saw a piece of paper inside. In one sentence, she said she could be your concubine if everything goes well, so I'll bring you the person. Thank you. Ha! Yan Ruqing suddenly laughed. Mo Shangshuang leaned over curiously to take a look. Yan Ruqing grabbed the note and looked up in a faint voice, saying, "Send her to the imperial prison for a proper trial. Then bring out the one who was locked in at noon, wash it clean, and have someone send it to the Empress Dowager tomorrow." After finishing speaking, he stood up and walked out, looking in the direction as if he was about to leave the mansion. Mo Shangshuang was puzzled and said, "Where are you going, Prince?" Yan Ruqing didn't respond and said, "Reply." End of this chapter. 6. Chapter 6 The Regent's Plan for Misconduct 6. You are listening at novelfull.audio. You all step back, I'll take a shower myself. Jinghuan held back the palace maid and stood in front of the bathtub, reaching out to stir the water inside. There was also a pile of petals sprinkled with red powder on the surface of the water, which was smoked by hot water and had a hazy aroma. After tinkering all day, she was really tired. After taking off her clothes, she went into the bathtub and slowly sat down. The warm water covered her shoulders, and she let out a comfortable sigh, but suddenly thought of a question. 001, is the live broadcast also on when I take a shower? No, host. When sensitive images appear, the live broadcast will automatically block the sound and image depending on the situation. You can rest assured that we will protect the host's privacy. That's good. Jinghuan lifted her hand and pulled off the hairpin on her head, like a waterfall of green silk falling down. She leaned back against the edge of the bathtub, closed her eyes, and carefully stroked the plot. Her body is the little Empress Dowager of the Great Xia Kingdom. Why is she the little Empress Dowager? Because she is the stepmother of Chongxi, married by the old emperor. This year is only 16. She was only 7 years older than the little emperor, and the little emperor called her sister. However, Chongxi is a folk saying. Smart people know that the late emperor was afraid of the regent's power, and the young emperor could not bear the burden and became a puppet. Therefore, they wanted to find someone who was evenly matched to balance him. Yan Ruqing was the youngest brother of the late emperor, but the most outstanding brother. If it weren't for his father's early death, it wouldn't have been his turn to sit on the throne. However, Yan Ruqing's mother's family declined, and he couldn't compete for him. He left the border far away, but who would have thought he had a bloody path in the border, forcing the late emperor to call him back and find a way to trap him in the imperial city. Fu Guojust was a prime minister with a general background. In recent years, he has also flourished in the officialdom and has connections with civil and military officials. His eldest son is now 25 years old and stationed in northern Xinjiang, holding a 100,000-strong army. Such a person could be used to blackmail Yan Ruqing, so the old emperor instructed the heavenly supervisor to fabricate a lie, saying that he needed to be overjoyed and die as a living horse doctor. Therefore, a decree was issued to select the 8-character excellent Jinghuan into the palace, becoming the stepmother. However, on the day of their wedding, the old emperor stretched out his legs and glared, and Jinghuan quickly went in to become the Empress Dowager, adding an 8-year-old son. It goes without saying what will happen afterwards. The people of the Duke of Fugua and his family threatened the emperor to order the princes, while the Yan Ruqing and his family wanted to control the court, and the situation between the two sides was like water and fire. Thinking about it, I have a big head. In my previous life, I was an empress, but in this life, I have to engage in intrigue and struggle, which is annoying. Jinghuan frowned and sank into the water, her seaweed-like long hair spreading and floating on the surface. After holding it for a while, Chuanhuan came up to take a breath when he suddenly heard a faint sound. The candlelight on the table also jumped, and the spring breeze rushed in with the scent of peach blossoms outside. Lu Jianhuan turned her head to look in the direction of the window, but her voice rang out from behind the screen, "It seems that I'm not here at the right time." "Does the Regent still have a habit of exploring girlfriends at night?" she said without a hint of panic. She slowly turned around in the water, facing the direction of the screen. The screen is painted with towering mountains and steep ridges, making it difficult to see the people here in a hazy way. She couldn't see Yan Ruqing clearly either. "I can only see a tall black shadow standing there." "Fragrant boudoir." Yan Ruqing's nose twitched slightly with a smile as she said, "It's really quite fragrant." Lu Jinghuan said, "Lone men and widows, the atmosphere is always inexplicably ambiguous, and their identities are destined to be mixed with a hint of confrontation in this ambiguity. What are you doing here? Didn't the person deliver it to you?" Lu Jinghuan took the initiative and casually splashed water on herself. Yan Ruqing listened to the pattering sound of water, her eyes flickering. "Yes, I deeply felt the Empress Dowager's sincerity, so I immediately set out to the palace to express my gratitude." Lu Jinghuan lowered her eyes and looked at the reflection in the water, tugging her lips and saying, "You have a smooth tongue." "Hee hee." Yan Ruqing chuckled softly, "Since we have such a witness, why didn't the Empress Dowager deliver it to your majesty and instead give it to me? During the day, you helped the AI family clear the siege, and the AI family cleared the obstacles for you. Isn't that a promise? The AI family has always had a strong voice. Is that right?" After asking this question, Yan Ruqing lost her voice and didn't know what she was thinking. She didn't leave and just clung there. Lu Jianhuan didn't pay any attention to him. After almost soaking, Shi Shiran stood up and picked up a handkerchief to wipe the water. She turned her back to Yan Ruqing, and the bathtub covered her lower body. Her long hair hung down and covered her snowy back. Coupled with a screen, she couldn't see anything clearly. But it's precisely because you can't see clearly that it's even more appealing. Yan Ruqing took a breath, and her peach blossom eyes, which always had a playful smile, finally sank. He pursed his lips and looked at Lu Qianhuan's beautiful figure, asking with an unclear meaning, "The Empress Dowager is not afraid at all? Is it because she trusts me so much, a lonely man and a widow?" Lu Jinghuan threw away her handkerchief, lifted her hand, and the small clothes and middle clothes on the hanger fell into her hands. She put them on one by one, turned over and glanced back at the screen. "If you have that skill, you can give it a try," she said as the words fell. The hall suddenly fell into a sticky silence. However, under calmness, the undercurrent surged. Suddenly, something broke through the air and rushed straight to the back of the building, with an imposing presence. Lu Jinghuan suddenly turned her head, slightly parted her lips, and accurately bit it, feeling cold to the touch. She lowered her eyes and saw that it was her golden hairpin. Her phoenix eyes narrowed slightly, and Yan Ruqing had already arrived behind her at some point. Her 5 fingers gripped her fiercely. Lu Jinghuan leaned back and bent her waist in a flexible curve in the air. She snorted, flipped over, propped herself up on the ground, and kicked Yan Ruqing from behind. Yan Ruqing retreated sideways, and Lu Jinghuan took the opportunity to bounce up. However, before she could stand firm, someone grabbed her neck from behind, and she couldn't help but look up. Her tall and resilient body was pressed up from behind, and Lu Jinghuan's golden hairpin was pulled away from her mouth. She breathed lightly and said coldly, "The Regent is very skilled." Yan Ruqing smiled but remained silent, her eyes lit up, and she grabbed the hand of Lu Qianhuan who was ambushing her. She then cut back and pressed the person onto the screen. "The Empress Dowager's martial arts are also good." Yan Ruqing bullied her and whispered in her ear, "But I remember that the Empress Dowager is delicate and weak, and has never practiced martial arts." Lu Jinghuan said, "She forgot about this mess." Suddenly transitioning into such a delicate body, she had not yet adapted. Her silence was undoubtedly a kind of tacit agreement. Yan Ruqing laughed again, and a mellow voice sounded in her ears. Lu Chuanhuan couldn't help but tighten her lips. What are you laughing at? The Empress Dowager's leverage has fallen into the hands of this king again. Yan Ruqing held a golden hairpin in her other hand and gently scraped against Lu Chuanhuan's neck. Lu Jinghuan suddenly felt goosebumps all over. What kind of leverage is this? I told you, if you help me once, I will repay it 100 times. Since we are allies, what's the point of giving you leverage? Lu Chuanhuan's tone was indifferent, as if he really didn't care at all. Yan Ruqing lowered her eyes and looked at her red earlobes and neck. She whispered, really? What are the Empress Dowager's plans for the future? I am all ears. Lu Jinghuan struggled to break free from his hand and struggled to turn between his chest and the screen. She looked up with a cold smile and said, don't you want to sit in that supreme position? Her hand fell on Yan Ruqing's neck, gradually rising along the sharp lines, tempting her to whisper, if you want it, I'll help you get it. How about that? 7, Chapter 7. The Regent's Conspiracy 7. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Help. What are these two people doing? It was so exciting from the beginning. Looking at their posture, I really want to pass through the screen and hold down their heads for me to kiss. Stop talking nonsense. The one in front, if you really go through the screen, it's not a romantic movie, it's a horror movie. Thank you. Don't laugh at me to death. But the way these pairs are probing each other is really tempting. I also want to press my head. Regent, can you do it? If you can't do it, switch to me. I can do it, Sister Beauty. 001 looked at the barrage and laughed back and forth. These netizens are really interesting, but it's impossible for these two people to be together so quickly. Look at this level of favorability. Just as he was thinking about it, he watched helplessly as the numbers on the screen scrolled, and the progress bar moved forward a bit, turning into 20. 001 immediately told Lu Chuanhuan the good news. Lu Chuanhuan's eyes flickered slightly as he stared at the face that was close by, his smile even stronger. Regent, do you dare to take a gamble? Why don't you dare? Yan Ruqing let go of her hand and Sher Shiran retreated with a straight expression, without any hint of intimacy. But I'm curious. Why did the Empress Dowager suddenly switch sides because of today's incident? Do you suspect it was your Majesty? Is today's matter not enough? Lu Jinghuan sat down at the table, casually tidying up her somewhat messy collar. She buttoned it to the top, covering the slender snow-white neck. Yan Ruqing's gaze paused slightly on it, and after a moment, she moved away as if nothing had happened. Female chastity is the fate of women in this world. Besides, as the Empress Dowager, the whole world is watching me and asking me to be a widow for the former emperor. If I do anything out of line, the entire Fugua mansion will be implicated. Father and brother have worked hard for half their lives to achieve such a beautiful scene. How can it be destroyed on me? Lu Jinghuan picked up the tea cup, his eyes cold and indifferent, as if he were two different people from the previous seductive look. Yan Ruqing raised her eyebrows. I haven't harmed him before, but he framed me like this. Don't blame me for being ruthless. Lojin's joyful language carries a killing intent, as if it were a pun. Yan Ruqing smiled and stood at the table, looking down at her. After a long time, she said, I will believe that the Empress Dowager will not treat you unfairly after everything is done. Lu Jinghuan lowered his eyes and took a sip of tea. That's not necessary. The prince will ascend to the throne tomorrow and leave a way for me and the Fugua mansion to survive. I'll disappear on my own and won't stay to obstruct my eyes. Yan Ruqing bent down and extended her palm. It's a deal. Lu Chuanhuan's phoenix eyes slightly hooked as he raised his hand and slammed it heavily. It's a deal, he said. Yan Ruqing took advantage of the darkness to return to the mansion, without disturbing anyone throughout the journey. Only Mo Shangshuang waited outside Yan Ruqing's bedroom and saw her fall from the roof with her wide robe and large sleeves, slowly blooming like a dark flower. "Prince, why have you been away for so long? I almost went to the palace to catch you." Mo Shuang quickly stepped down the stairs to greet him. Yan Ruqing glanced at him and said, "The Empress Dowager has been taking a shower for a while, it's delayed." "Oh. Mo put on his big eyes. "Wait a minute, what does it mean that the Empress Dowager's bathing time is a bit delayed?" This statement can easily lead to imaginative thoughts. Yan Ruqing walked and said, "When I went, she was taking a shower. I can't pull someone out of the water for her to talk to." Mo Shangshuang's face turned slightly red. "I see, I thought you two were okay. Yan Ruqing pushed open the door, her long eyelashes hanging slightly. "I didn't think so before, but upon closer inspection today, the little Empress Dowager is indeed charming." Mo Shangshuang's just let go heart lifted again and whispered, "Prince, that's the Empress Dowager. In name, she's still your sister. In law. So what?" Yan Ruqing glanced at him and sat down lazily holding her chin. "I think she's very different from before," she said. Mo Shangshuang was puzzled and said, "What do you say?" Yan Ruqing said that he tried Lu Weihuan. When investigating the little Empress Dowager before, she clearly didn't learn martial arts, and she was weak and very delicate. After entering the palace, she had a lot of temper, but she was far from being so decisive and cruel as she showed today. Mo Shangshuang frowned after listening and said, "Does the prince suspect that she has been tampered with?" Yan Ruqing instinctively wanted to caress the trigger on her thumb, but ended up feeling empty. She looked down and realized that she had given the trigger to Lu Chuanhuan. Mo Shangshuang also noticed and asked in surprise, "Prince, where is your jade ring?" "Lost. I'll give it to the Empress Dowager," Yan Ruqing said in a flat tone. However, this sentence directly made Mo Shuang explode. "Give it to her. That's a token that can mobilize the Shadow Guard. How can you give it to her, Prince?" After speaking, he looked at Yan Ruqing angrily and said, "You said you're not interested in the little Empress Dowager. You gave away half of your wealth." Yan Ruqing had no intention of explaining. He frowned and his eyes lit up like snow. "It's noisy," he said. Mo Shangshuang said, "That's it, he now suspects that the prince has been transferred." The audience in the live broadcast room laughed as they watched his expression. Mo Shangshuang. "My blind best friend has been arched by someone, and I am a big grass. Don't be too outrageous, but you really have a good image." The collapse of the character of the Cold War god, loyalty and poison only doubt life online. Many people even started to feel heartbroken and started giving rewards. However, these characters in the small world were not able to earn points even if they were given rewards. However, everyone's excited heart couldn't hold back, so they all ran to give rewards to Lu Chuanhuan. Lu Jinghuan lay in bed in the middle of the night, listening to the continuous sound of system prompts, reminding her to transfer her points to her account. She looked at the bed tent in confusion. What happened? Yan Ruqing has been walking for half a day, hasn't she? Does she lie still? And those so-called viewers love to watch more. As she closed her eyes, she silently thought to herself, why don't you lie down for a little longer tomorrow? However, there are some things that cannot be imagined and can easily come true. Lu Jinghuan took a shower yesterday and blew the wind, which immediately caused heat. She slept until 3 strokes of the sun didn't wake up. Chu Yun came in to take a look when she was worried, but saw Lu Jinghuan's face turn red and her lips were dry and peeling. She was startled and reached out to touch it. "Oh my goodness, my forehead is so hot that I can steam eggs." She quickly rushed outside and shouted, "The Empress Dowager is sick, quickly pass on the imperial physician." After a quarter of an hour, the imperial physician ran in with a small medicine box and checked Lu Chuanhuan's pulse. He sighed and said, "The Empress Dowager's body is weak. She must have caught a cold from the cold wind, combined with some internal heat, which caused her to burn." I will prescribe a pair of medicine to remove heat and give it to the Empress Dowager to take. Take a good rest for a few days, relax, and it will be fine. Chu Yun looked at Lu Jinghuan with concern, but coincidentally met her open eyes and exclaimed in surprise, "Madam, you're awake." Lu Jinghuan felt heavy on her head and light on her feet, her whole body boiling hot and feeling extremely uncomfortable. What's wrong with AI family? Requesting tickets. Don't force me to stand up, please. 8. Chapter 8 The Regent's Plan for Misconduct 8. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. The Empress has a fever, and the imperial physician said it was due to getting both hot and cold. Empress, did you not close the window when you took a shower last night? After Chu Yun finished speaking, he shook his head and said, "No, I checked and the windows are all closed." Lu Chuanhuan's words were blocked. It was indeed closed before, but later Yan Ruqing came in and kept it open. Did you catch a cold after blowing for a while? It's still spring now. Lu Jinghuan felt a bit depressed. She had often practiced martial arts in her past life and had a good foundation. She had hardly ever been sick, let alone caught a cold, so she never knew that the cold was so uncomfortable. She struggled to get up, but Chu Yun quickly pushed her back and said, "Empress, let's rest well in bed. I'll go see the imperial physician." Lu Jinghuan felt uncomfortable and didn't force herself. Anyway, as a Empress Dowager, she didn't need to go to court, just lie down. She opened her eyes and looked at the bed tent, asking, 001, why is this body so weak? Because when she was born, Lady Fu Guogong's health was not very good, and she passed away shortly after giving birth. Therefore, this is not something that was brought out of her mother's womb. She is weak and sickly, and needs to be taken care of carefully. Compared to her previous life, her body is indeed much worse. But don't you want to experience a different life? This is also an experience. Lu Jinghuan. Haha. It's not necessary. After Chu Yun returned, he instructed the palace attendants to decoct medicine. He poured hot water for Lu Chuanhuan and brought it to the bedside. "Madam, do you want some to moisten your throat?" Lu Jianhuan nodded, and Chu Yun helped her sit up and handed her the tea cup. "It's a bit hot, be careful, madam," he said. Lu Chuanhuan held it and blew, drowsily taking a sip after another. Seeing that she seemed to be in a bad mood, Chu Yun shared some interesting stories from the palace with her. "I heard that in the morning court today, Your Majesty harshly rebuked the ministers from yesterday and ordered them not to mention them again. He also gave something to appease the Duke of Fu, but his face was not very good and he didn't seem to have calmed down. My daughter, who grew up in the palm of my hand, was so humiliated that she almost lost her life. It's strange that Duke Fugua is happy." Lu Chuanhuan tugged his lips. Also, the maidservant heard from Lu Bai's disciple Lu Shui that the ministers were offering sacrifices to His Majesty, hoping that he would appoint an empress and concubine. This surprised Lu Jianhuan a bit. She raised her eyebrows and felt a sense of oppression. Empress Dowager and Empress Dowager. How old is he? These ministers are a bit impatient. Chu Yun whispered, "After yesterday's birthday, Your Majesty will be 9 years old. Although she is a little too young to be married, it is the same to marry and cultivate relationships first." Lu Jinghuan held the tea cup and squinted her eyes. "That's right, I'll get married first and occupy a spot. While Your Majesty is still young and easy to handle, I'll quickly install my own people." Chu Yun asked, "Madam, do you want to intervene? Why did the AI family get involved?" Lu Jinghuan put down his cup and said calmly, "He married 10 empresses, and in front of the AI family, he had to shout 'Mother,' in a proper manner. As long as the AI family doesn't die, no one can get over it." Chu Yun thought it was the same, but he didn't advise again. She stood up to take a look at the medicine when suddenly there were hurried footsteps outside. She leaned forward and glanced out. "What's the rush?" The little palace maid immediately stopped and bowed when she saw her. "Sister Chu Yun, the regent has sent someone something. What is it? Chu Yun felt inexplicably unhappy in her heart. The little palace maid bit her lip and whispered, "It's a eunuch who has been castrated." Chu Yun. She quickly went in and reported to Lu Jinghuan, who was not surprised at all after listening. "Then let someone carry it in," she said. "Mother, it's better not to look at such filthy things. Don't stain mother's eyes." The voice of the little emperor suddenly rang out, and Chu Yun quickly knelt aside. "I have seen your majesty," he said. Lu Jinghuan sat on the bed without much reaction. "Why did your majesty come? Are you not busy today?" The little emperor looked at Lu Jinghuan's haggard face and asked with concern, "How is Empress mother feeling now? How did she catch a cold in good condition? Are these servants not taking good care of her?" Chu Yun's cold sweat has come down. "It's nothing to do with them, it's because the AI family opened the window while bathing yesterday." Lu Jinghuan looked at Chu Yun and said, "Step back." "Yes." Chu Yun breathed a sigh of relief and quickly left. The little emperor glanced at her and asked softly, "Mother dealt with another one yesterday, but what did she find out?" Lu Jinghuan suddenly realized that the little emperor was always visiting the Three Treasures Hall to test his reputation. "It's not a big deal, it's just that she's not honest. She stole things from the AI family and even flirted with her ex-boyfriend. The AI family couldn't bear it, so they beat her up and sent her back to the Fuguok Gong mansion for disposal." "Really? Then it's okay not to keep such people." The little emperor looked steadily at Lu Jinghuan's face, as if distinguishing the truth from the falsehoods in her words. Lu Jinghuan remained calm at all. Yesterday, the execution was in front of everyone, and when she confessed later, she took the person away. Apart from her, Chu Yun, and her trusted guards, no fourth person knew what she had said. According to the Duke's temperament, most people have been beaten to death and thrown to mass graves, and the AI family is too lazy to ask. "How did your majesty ask about this?" Lu Jinghuan's gaze fell on the little emperor as he explored. The little emperor tightened his hand and squeezed his cuffs. "Ah, it's nothing. I'm just worried that there won't be enough people around my mother to serve her well. Since my mother is fine, I will go back first. I have also taken the guard with me, and the regent has forced a confession. My mother can rest assured that I will handle it impartially." Lu Jinghuan waved her hand and didn't say anything. After sitting for a while and feeling dizzy, she lay down. Watching the bed curtain fall, the little emperor reluctantly glanced at it before leaving with heavy steps. "Why don't you leave the guards and listen to what he says? Let the little emperor take it away like this, are you stupid? If you really ask something, would the regent easily send someone to the palace? He must have kept it as a backup, and it doesn't seem to be useful. But he castrated the person and sent it over, probably to vent his anger on the Empress Dowager. He didn't say he wanted to repay the gift yesterday. If you want to say that, I'll bump into it." What these people thought of, Lu Jinghuan also thought of it, but she didn't feel as much as these people did. She was born with very few emotions, or in other words, had no emotions at all, otherwise she wouldn't have been targeted by this unlucky system. Lu Jinghuan lay down for a while, feeling her head getting heavier and heavier. She was awakened by Chu Yun and took medicine, but soon fell asleep again. After being in a daze for a few days, Lu Jinghuan's illness was finally completely cured. Yan Ruqing hasn't shown up these days, and Lu Jinghuan hasn't taken it seriously. Instead, the viewers are anxious. Finally, on a warm spring day, Lu Jinghuan took the initiative to leave the palace gate and take a stroll around the imperial garden. However, as soon as she entered, she saw a group of beautifully dressed women gathered in groups of 3 or 2, talking together. Lu Jinghuan was taken aback, and from a distance, he saw a person sitting in the pavilion. From his back, he could see Yan Ruqing. She paused slightly in her footsteps, pondering whether to go over. However, she didn't know if her eyes had grown on the back of her head. After only a few glances, the people in the pavilion turned their heads and accurately found her hiding place. They even smiled at her and said, "Empress Dowager, don't be safe." Thank you to all the spectators for their support. Thank you. 9. Chapter 9 The Regent's Plan for Misconduct 9. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Lu Jinghuan was taken aback for a moment, and Chuyun approached her and whispered, "Empress Dowager, the regent has seen us. Do you want to go over?" She didn't know about Lu Jianhuan's current relationship with Yan Ruqing, but what Chu Qin confessed to before was Yan Ruqing, and she was a bit hesitant. Lu Jianhuan stroked his sleeve, straightened his spine, and with a dignified posture, he supported Chuyun's hand towards the garden. "Why not go over? Is my family afraid of him?" Chuyun shook his head and said, "I'm just afraid he might cause a stumbling block for the Empress Dowager." Lu Jianhuan remained silent and walked closer, seeing more clearly. Yan Ruqing sat in the octagonal pavilion, dressed in a dark blue brocade robe, with a tight jade belt that accentuated his broad shoulders and narrow waist, exuding a luxurious demeanor. With one hand holding a cup of wine, lazily swaying, and the other hand resting on her forehead, Lu Quan was overjoyed and even raised his glass to her. "I heard that the Empress Dowager fell ill a few days ago and was burdened with trivial matters, so I was unable to visit the palace. Please forgive me, Empress Dowager. This glass will serve as an apology for me." He lifted his cup and drank it all in one gulp, his Adam's apple sliding up and down as he swallowed. The scene was originally very charming, but the barrage suddenly changed color. The prince has a big Adam's apple. Isn't it true that people with a big Adam's apple have stronger abilities in that area? Their desires are also stronger than the average person, and these people are all subwoofers. Previously, don't say anything without scientific basis. The size of the Adam's apple has nothing to do with that, but people with protruding Adam's apple sometimes look very sexy. The prince's voice is indeed quite low and soft, it's just that scumbag-like feeling. "My ears are about to get pregnant," moaning, the sisters in front, "Please wear a pair of pants." Lu Jianhuan couldn't help but stare at Yan Ruqing's Adam's apple, not knowing what he was thinking. After finishing a glass of wine, Yan Ruqing didn't get up either. In the eyes of outsiders, it was a provocation to not take the Empress Dowager seriously. Chu Yun's face looked a bit ugly and couldn't help but remind, "Regent, why can't we greet the Empress Dowager with courtesy?" Lu Jianhuan remained silent and looked up at Yan Ruqing with a calm expression. Yan Ruqing smiled and put down the wine cup, then pointed his finger on the stone table. "I thought that was already considered a gift just now," he said. The scattered warblers, swallows, and swallows in the garden, seeing the two of them confronting each other, immediately approached this side without any trace, raising their ears to listen excitedly. Rumors have it that the Empress Dowager and the Regent are incompatible, and upon seeing them today, it is indeed so. The person who was watching in the dark quickly went to report to the little emperor. "Regent, the AI family is the Empress Dowager and can also be considered your sister. In law. Are you not afraid of being ridiculed for being so disrespectful to your sister. In law?" Yan Ruqing's face turned cold. "Sister-in-law." He stood up and lowered his eyes, looking at Lu Jinghuan with a smile on his face. "Is it a 16-year-old sister. In law? Isn't it too young? You're reckless. How dare you be so disrespectful in front of the Empress Dowager?" Chu Yunqi's face turned red. Although she was afraid of Yan Ruqing, she still stood in front of Lu Jinghuan. Yan Ruqing glanced at her and then looked at Lu Qianhuan, indicating something and saying, "You servant are quite loyal." Lu Jinghuan gently pushed away Chu Yun, taking a step forward against Yan Ruqing's dim gaze, with an imposing demeanor. "Naturally, he is more loyal than some smiling tigers," he said. "Oh." Yan Ruqing looked at her and with just one word, it ignited a fire. The atmosphere was tense as if it could be broken in the next moment. The wealthy women next to them were too grand to breathe or look over here, all bowing their heads and pretending to be admiring flowers. In the imperial garden, there was a complete silence, and the hurried footsteps were infinitely amplified. Everyone turned their heads together to look. The little emperor walked quickly and saw the two people with swords and crossbows at a glance. His face changed and he raised his voice, saying, "Why are the empress and uncle both standing?" Jinghuan snorted coldly at Yan Ruqing, turned around and stood on the steps, standing tall and facing the little emperor, saying, "Why did your majesty come?" The noblewomen came over one after another, kneeling on both sides and bowing, "I have seen your majesty, Empress Dowager, Regent." The little emperor didn't even glance at them, so he waved his hand and let them up. He took a step forward and looked at Lu Chuanhuan first. Seeing that she was in good spirits, he then turned to Yan Ruqing. Yan Ruqing's perfunctory salute said, "I have seen your majesty before. Uncle Huang, you don't need to be polite." The little emperor smiled and took Lu Chuanhuan's hand, holding her down on the other side. "I invited Uncle Huang to come." "Oh." Lu Jiuhuan withdrew his hand without leaving a trace and stroked his sleeve. "Your Majesty, what did you ask the regent to come to the imperial garden for?" "The ministers all hoped that I would get married soon and win the hearts of the people. Therefore, I chose from the portraits of noble women that I sent, but I couldn't find one, so I asked Uncle Huang to help." The little emperor glanced at his empty hand and shook it without leaving a trace. He looked up at Lu Jinghuan and said, "Since the empress mother has also come, let's go together." Lu Jinghuan raised his eyebrows and said, "I see." The noble women stood together, nervously peeking over here. When Lu Chuanhuan looked over, they all lowered their heads again. Yan Ruqing smiled cynically and said, "Your Majesty, does this mean you don't trust me?" "Uncle Huang's words are too heavy, I have no intention of doing so." The little emperor explained anxiously. "Regent, is that how you speak to your Majesty as a vassal? Who gave you the courage?" Lu Chuanhuan's face sank. Yan Ruqing also smiled and said with a faint expression, "Isn't the Empress Dowager the same?" As the two of them were about to pinch each other again, the little emperor quickly raised his hand and gestured to the people outside, "Come forward and let Uncle Huang and Queen Mother take a look." In front of outsiders, the two of them still felt embarrassed and suddenly stopped talking. The noblewomen took a step forward and stood in front of the octagonal pavilion, shy and timid. They occasionally looked up at the little emperor, but more often than not, they were looking at Yan Ruqing. Compared to the young emperor who did not grow, Yan Ruqing was clearly more handsome and masculine. Many people quietly blushed. Lu Jinghuan looked at her calmly, holding up a teacup to cover the corner of her lips. "Disaster water." She labeled Yan Ruqing in her heart. The little emperor naturally noticed it, but he couldn't show any dissatisfaction and could only pretend not to know, saying, "Lu Bai, give the roster to the empress and uncle." "Yes." With a wave of his hand, Lu Bai and the two eunuchs immediately handed over 2 flower lists. They were supposed to keep one for the little emperor, but when Lu Jinghuan arrived, the little emperor and Lu Jinghuan took a look. After Lu Jinghuan opened it, she placed the roster on the table and nodded with her fingertips. First, the daughter of the Minister of Rites, Shenduruo. A beautiful girl wearing a light blue robe immediately walked out of the crowd, and Lu Genhuan asked the little emperor, "What does your Majesty think?" The little emperor nodded and said, "I will listen to my mother." "That's her," Lu Jianhuan said without hesitation. Lu Bai opened his mouth and was about to shout when Yan Ruqing suddenly interrupted, "Wait a minute. When I write about Shenduruo, the melody of mountain ghosts rings in my mind, the people in the mountains fragrant Durua, drinking from stone springs and the shade of pine and cypress." 10, Chapter 10. The Regent's Conspiracy 10. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As Yan Ruqing spoke, everyone became nervous. The little emperor pursed his lips and looked at him innocently, whispering, "Uncle Huang, don't you think it's good?" Lu Jinghuan's eyes curled up, his head turned slightly cold, and he said, "What's the regent's opinion?" "Your Majesty has already nodded, are you not satisfied?" "I'm not satisfied." The daughter of the Minister of Rights is noble, but there are also more noble ones. He squinted his eyes and looked around freely in the crowd, casually pointing at someone and lazily saying, "Are you the daughter of Duke Ning?" The young lady who was pointed out by him stood up with a timid expression and said, "Yes." The Duke of Ningguo was an elder of the three dynasties, with a wealth of education and strict family education. His daughter was able to hold the position of Zhonggong. Just her. Yan Ruqing didn't ask the little emperor at all and made the decision directly. The little emperor was in a dilemma, "Mother. Uncle. Why don't you discuss it? There is no precedent for Xia to marry two empresses." Shendurua and the daughter of the duke looked at each other with different expressions. Discuss. The regent is so autocratic, where does he mean to discuss with the AI family? Lu Jinghuan slammed the table and stood up angrily. Since that's the case, let the regent choose for himself. The AI family is tired, Chu Yun. Help the AI family back to the palace. Yes, be careful, Empress Dowager. Chu Yun helped her hand and walked out, causing the little emperor to look embarrassed. Empress Dowager. Yan Ruqing looked at Lu Jinghuan's slender figure and smiled with a curved lips without any trace. When the little emperor saw her, he immediately changed his face and said solemnly, "The Empress Dowager's temper is getting stronger and stronger. It's okay, I am a man and I am one head shorter in terms of seniority. I will go apologize to avoid making it difficult for your majesty." The little emperor was extremely grateful and said, "Uncle Huang is truly understanding and reasonable." Yan Ruqing brushed her sleeves and stood up, "Your majesty, make your own decision." He strode past with a shooting star, and the noblewomen retreated one after another, as if hiding from a malevolent star. Yan Ruqing didn't care at all, he was in a very good mood now. Yo yo yo, look at his face rippling, look at his light footsteps, don't be too obvious about the budding of spring heart. What to apologize for, maybe to pursue my wife, really. They were arguing just now, weren't they? I feel like we're about to start fighting the next second. How do you see that Chuanxin is stirring up? Sigh, silly child, fighting in bed is also a fight. Lu Jinghuan walked to a secluded corner of the imperial garden and said to Chu Yun, "Go to the intersection and guard." Chu Yun was puzzled and said, "Empress. I'll stay alone for a while. If Yan Ruqing comes, let him in. If anyone else comes, stop him." Chu Yun was stunned, "Who should I let in?" "Regent. You're not going to have a big fight in this deserted place, are you?" Her eyes were too naked, and after understanding, Lu Jianhuan fell silent for a moment and sincerely asked, "Does it look like the AI family can beat him?" Chu Yun. That's true, we really can't start a fight. Before she could ask again, Lu Jianhuan turned around and entered the rockery. Chu Yun walked to the intersection with a complex heart and looked out for the wind. In less than half an hour, she did indeed see Yan Ruqing strode over without anyone around her. As soon as she saw her, Yan Ruqing smiled and said, "Where is your empress?" Chu Yun saw him as if he saw a pig about to arch his own water and spiritual cabbage. He didn't want to speak at all, only raised his hand and pointed lazily behind him. Yan Ruqing didn't argue with her and nodded before walking over. As she walked up to the rockery, Yan Ruqing turned her gaze and saw a forest of rocks and rocks. Lu Jinghuan leaned against a mountain wall and looked up at the willow branches hanging from it. Winter has passed, and spring has arrived. Willow branches sprout new buds, adorning the brown branches with a fresh and tender appearance. Lu Jinghuan's fingertips fell on it, not being compared, but instead becoming more and more fair and transparent, like a flawless jade. "Since you're here, why don't you make a sound? Is the prince planning to scare the AI family?" Lu Jianhuan turned her face slightly, her eyes looking over as if she had a hook. However, there was no ambiguous expression on her face, forming a temptation of separation. Yan Ruqing's eyes were bright, reflecting the light of the lake and the sun, so beautiful that people were unconsciously attracted. Lu Chuanhuan couldn't help but take another look. Is the Empress Dowager waiting for her ministers? Yan Ruqing was tall and would be swept away by willows if he stood straight. He had to lower his head and raise his hand to brush away. Ask knowingly. Lu Jinghuan glanced at him and turned to face the lake. I performed well in the opera today, he said. Yan Ruqing stood shoulder to shoulder with her and chuckled lightly. It's better for the Empress Dowager to cooperate. What have you been doing during this period? Lu Jinghuan had been recuperating and had not heard any news from Yan Ruqing, as if it had evaporated suddenly. The border is a bit uneasy. Yan Ruqing's tone became more serious, and Lu Jin frowned. Those barbarians want to invade again. I don't know yet, but I don't think it will last long. Lu Chuanhuan remained silent. In front of the external enemies, the affairs within the court were not a big deal. After a long silence, Lu Jinghuan suddenly said, this may not necessarily be a bad thing for you. Yan Ruqing looked over and Lu Chuanhuan looked at him without hesitation. The vast sea allows fish to leap, and the sky allows birds to fly. If you don't have this ambition, I can tell. A very plain sentence, like a stone thrown into the center of a lake, stirred up countless ripples. Yan Ruqing stared deeply at her, wanting to see her complex heart through her extremely black eyes, but there was nothing inside. Her appearance was as pure as usual. After a while, he didn't say anything, just smiled lightly and turned around before leaving. Lu Jianhuan didn't keep him, just watched him walk away. However, before taking 2 steps, he suddenly stopped, looking from his back as if he was pulling something out of his sleeve. Suddenly, he turned around and smiled at her, saying, catch it. Lu Chuanhuan's expression was cold and he raised his hand as if facing a great enemy, firmly grasping it. When he took it down, he saw that it was an oil paper bag. She looked at Yan Ruqing in confusion, but Yan Ruqing had already turned around and walked forward, waving his hand with his back to her. The posture is both graceful and casual. Lu Jinghuan's eyes flickered slightly, staring at the palm-sized oil paper bag for a moment before finally opening it. A sweet smell came to my face, and everyone in the building cheered for a moment. Zongzi sugar. The zongzi-shaped sugar twinkled with amber color in the bright sun. When the wind blew, the sweet taste went straight into people's hearts. What did he give me candy for? Lu Jinghuan felt confused from the bottom of her heart for the first time. 001 held his face and smiled, saying, is it because the host was sick before? Drinking medicine is very bitter, so I'm sending you sugar. Lu Jinghuan frowned with half a doubt, is he someone who can do such a thing? Such a proud and reckless person, giving people candy. But he has a liking for you of 20. 20 has already surpassed ordinary people and reached the realm of half a friend. Oh yes, just now it increased by 5 points, it's 20.5. Lu Dihuan hesitated to look at the zongzi candy in his hand. After a long silence, he picked up one and put it into his mouth. Host, is it sweet? The zongzi sugar slowly melts between the lips and teeth, and the sweetness spreads. Then the sugar coating is crushed, revealing pine nuts inside, which are fragrant and crisp, neutralizing the greasy sugar, and the taste is more rich. Lu Dihuan felt inexplicably lightsome at the bottom of her heart. She murmured, zongzi sugar is the taste. I also want to eat.